All right. Hey, everyone. So today I'm with Dusty from Dusty's Lab. If you don't know who that is, you should definitely check out his channel. He's been on my channel before, and we've had a lot of discussions about various things, psychedelics and the like. But in our Discord server, Dusty posted this video about AI art and the amazing, kind of unbelievable generative potential of AI art. Um, and it was just super interesting how much farther we've gone with AI, like in this very unprecedented direction. And I'm sure you guys have seen like the enormous amount of AI art that's been generated. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's like by this at this point exceeded the total amount of art produced by the human species. That's just how insane it is. So Dusty, if you want to just like tell us about yourself and your background and why this interests you so much.
Yeah, thanks, T-Pan. So I'm about 30 years old. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I studied philosophy and computer science and a little engineering. I never finished any of those degrees, though. And then I got out in the workforce, kind of learned an eclectic bunch of skills: welding, access control, surveillance. I was formally trained in HVAC controls then at that point. And actually, since the pandemic, I started my own R&D business, and I'm trying to bring a couple of products to market. But I'm very interested in pretty much just tech in general. It fascinates me, and then how that then influences and is involved with philosophy and just how we function as human beings is also really interesting to me. So that's kind of how we're going to have this conversation.
I mean, what interests me about like your background is that, I mean, from my perspective, like not having a computer background, I know I've looked into it. I've looked into like how transistors work, and it's super fascinating. But to me, it still seems like super abstract. But I imagine from your perspective, you're imagining a very physical process happening that's actually able to kind of get to the point of of how neural networks work and how learning in computers work. And so in your mind, it's probably a very like literal process, whereas in my mind, it's very like abstract and like I can barely even understand it.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I'm not I don't have the formal training in like the deepest level of electrical engineering. So like even though I can design circuit boards, when it comes to like impedance and high performance boards or like getting the most bang for your buck and really doing it professionally, I would need a bit of help. For like the last 50 to 20% of that, if that makes sense. Like if I wanted to bring like an ROHS certified product to market, I'm going to need a little bit of help to get that last bit on it. But like, yeah, it is true that, and what I try to do, and because, I would actually pretty much classify myself primarily as an inventor, is I try to keep a really macroscopic view on how technology works and like in the larger tech suite, you could call it, that it operates within. So like, people are really blown away, and including me, just by the speed and rapidity in general that technology has developed at in the past 100 to 200 years. And what you need to understand is that in the same way that we're going to have the conversation about AI being very cumulative, technology in general is, and specifically computer science, because you're talking about this abstract process. What's super interesting, and like what I haven't delved that much into, and what I'm trying to explain, like is the limit of my understanding, is even though I'm like formally trained in philosophical, symbolic logic, if you want to call it that, just Western symbolic logic. That basically directly translates to how computers function, actually. And what's really interesting about it, it's basically like just net. This is going to sound awful to anyone who knows a little bit more than me, but it's like a collection and like nested NAND gates, where it's like a very basic logical operation, but when you nest it and combine it, together in this like. Then you can basically create any logical operation, and just because these things are so small and they're operating so fast, it seems like magic, And the way that this is something you might not know, but like that I didn't understand. And I'm sure it's probably more about waveforms than actually like making contact. But the way that when you set your CPU in your computer, it's running at 3 gigahertz. That's 3,000 times per second. I believe it. It could even be an order of magnitude more than that. But the point is just that, like, from our human perspective, it's so fast, and it's kind of like operating those logical operations at that frequency. And so, like, you've got like a telegram, like a guy, like, pressing a button really, really fast, and that guy pressing the button really fast, that frequency on which, like, you do the calculations is actually controlled by a little crystal, and it's a piezoelectric crystal. And in the same way that when you have a lighter, when you click that lighter and the flame ignites, and there's a little spark, it's the exact same thing, except when you put current through the crystal, it vibrates. So that the crystal is vibrating and creating that frequency. So it's the same process in reverse, but manipulated to then run a machine.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and what's super interesting to me now is how it's slowly bleeding into my understanding of how neuroscience works,
Mm-hmm.
and then beyond that, like, feeding back into how we then kind of model neural networks virtually and back into the computer, and the computer is, using physical transistors to then model virtual space and a virtual machine. It's wild,
I mean, the way I understand it is these are very basic mathematical operations, like just happening, like you're just using electricity to do math. But it seems that, first of all, if you increase the speed at which those operations can take place, and even though these are very simple operations, like combined in various ways, it ends up becoming a very complicated mathematical operation. I think, I mean, when I look back at the history of computers, it literally just seems like a bunch of math, like people just trying to solve math problems more efficiently. But then to think that that eventually evolves into this is rather absurd. And we were talking about how neural networks are used to kind of actually train computers to learn. And this is kind of what gives these AI arts the AI art, such as Midjourney, and there's a lot of different programs, but it kind of gives them their power. But it's just so much further than what's been capable in the past, right?
Yeah, and I mean, these layers, it just keeps layering on top of itself. So now at this point, we have layers and layers of transistors on top of virtual machines on top, because like you can have a virtual machine reference data from another virtual machine somewhere else on the internet. And actually that's like the disco diffusion, and a lot of these AI generators, they're cloud based. So there's some cloud based data, so and you can control what pool of data and like the metrics that it's using to generate what its output is based on that. So and that's a fundamental aspect of how it works. So let's try to just before we get too far into the weeds, let's try to like bring it back to basics and get back to like a brief synopsis of like what AI is and like like kind of how it works. So like you said, so I think you mentioned the word neural network. So a neural network is I mean, it can be physical, but a lot of times it's a virtual machine. So you have a computer running a virtual machine in the same way that you might, create a virtual machine and have Windows XP or Windows whatever you would want. There's a program called Docker as well, which is actually really important for sharing like development environments. So like you can literally create a virtual copy of a machine inside of your machine. And what we're basically doing is, rather than just modeling a basic computer, we're going to model a series of many interconnected nodes, which are meant to mimic neurons in the brain. So kind of what you said, that even though we're basically only using a very simple, like the most basic logical operation, but nesting it and combining it in such a way that really complicated mathematical calculations can be done, and especially at the speed that we're doing it, even though we like the fundamental node structure, like each node itself, each neuron, each neural connection is the same, or fundamentally the same. And it is a very simple operation when you layer them and connect and have like a lot of parallel connections together. you can do really complicated operations. The difference between like the what could we call it? We could call it discrete computer science, and then we could call it
Continuous.
what would you want? Continuous. That's fine. Yeah, continuous. Continuous calculations, continuous mathematical operations via like these node systems, is that the node systems are opaque. You can't, like, as it's training, so as you put in an input and then tell it whether or not what it spit out was correct or not, it'll reconfigure somewhat randomly depending on how it's actually programmed those connections inside of that, what you could consider a black box, is a common term that people will use when you have something that's doing a calculation and on an input data, but you don't know what it is. You can call it a black box, and it's the same concept has sprung up in behaviorism, computers in general, philosophy, all kinds of thought experiments, and it's really extensive. But this black box effect and just the increasing power of these systems, and beyond that, the increasing opaqueness, because it's getting harder and harder to see where they're being influenced, where they're pulling their data from, like what they're being used for. And like I'm kind of like doing a little bit of foreshadowing to what could possibly be the end of the conversation, but that you can create like these self-reinforcing feedback loops, based on like what calculations you're doing. And what's really interesting to me now is just how similar that is to human existence in general. So just like hype, and how we like, just in the same way that we might keep running like, for instance, in the video that kind of spurred this conversation, he talks about how we might have a problem where there'll be a runaway effect, where there are specific terms that you can put into the AI generation prompt that like produce good results. And because people keep producing results with that prompt, it'll get increasingly better. And because of that, people can increasingly want to use it. But the problem is that then that creates a giant bubble of data on the other end of the machine algorithm, and that then feeds back into the input data. So like you have, like, if you take the output as your input, then you can start to distort, and it's kind of like, it's almost like inbreeding is a weird way to think about it, but
right.
it's like, yeah, and just like, how similar is that to everything? How much does tradition trump common sense, and just or just like, like momentum just overcome any type of betterment, if that makes sense. We got a lot of things going on here. It's a super complicated topic, and I mean, the first time we had this conversation, it was so hard to not jump around, because we're talking about computers, we're talking about technology, we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about the human brain. It's a lot of things. So. And what's really cool, and what I want to bring back to, is when you said it, like, these really simple interactions, between these nodes within this network, or even like a transistor on a chip, it all it fundamentally is firing or not firing. So in the same way that you have a binary system on a traditional computer, even though a neuron is super complicated in terms of, okay, we have neurochemistry and a synapse, and reuptake inhibitors and agonists and dendrites and axons, and beyond that we have like insulation, which increases or decreases the resistive aspects of it. It either fires or it doesn't. Okay,
yeah, it's a yes or a no.
Yeah, it's a yes or a no, and out of that, out of just the yes or no, propagating electric current down an axon, we somehow get consciousness, right? And beyond that, first of all, we get amazing outputs in the form of behavior, but then even beyond that, we get a qualitative experience, consciousness, and so, I mean, another bit of foreshadowing for this conversation is, and what I think you're especially interested in, is just like, at what point are these machines that we're building going to become conscious, and like, what does that mean, and what are the moral, ethical implications of that, and just like, it's really cool to think about that and try to understand it. And so
I mean the when I was first starting to understand consciousness, I mean, the discussion of conscious AI or conscious robots has always been a thing. I mean, it's been a thing in sci-fi for a very long time. Um, and the reason it definitely seems plausible is because why would we expect there to be any difference between the matter in our brains and the matter in machines? It's the same, made of the same stuff fundamentally. So why would our matter give rise to consciousness and that matter not? But then I think it's slowly become apparent that we can equip robots with intelligence and with the capacity to do very remarkable things. And then the question becomes, at what point are they actually experiencing something? And I mean, one of the thought experiments I had when I was writing my book was, if you could, it was what kind of the nature of qualia in general, and the example was Mary's room. And so this is a thought experiment, if you've never heard of it, where Mary is a scientist who lives in a room that's completely devoid of the color red. But she knows about the color red because she's read about it, and she knows everything about the physics behind it, and how it functions. But then the question gets posed: if she goes out into the world and experiences a red object, does her knowledge of the concept of red change? And some people argue that the answer is no, but I don't think they've thought about it properly, because I think that the answer is definitely. The experience of a qualia is very different from understanding how that qualia works. And one of the, I guess, reasons behind that is because qualia are intransferable. I can talk about red, but I don't know if my red is the same as your red. But how this relates to AI and computers is I imagine that if you could show a computer a color, like an example of a color, would it experience that color? Would it be able to recognize that color? So if I go into Google and I search blue, it'll pop up a bunch of blue images or just examples of the color blue. And my question is, I mean, my intuition tells me that's not the same as experiencing qualia, but it's related somehow. And the reason it's related is because, similar to Mary in Mary's room, you've shown the computer an example. It's seen the example and it knows how to refer to it now. So when I type in blue on Google, it knows what to search for. And I think it has to be related in that sense. We even our own qualia and our own experience. For example, you can argue that the color blue arises from specific receptors in my eye that are coded specifically so that I can see blue. But color is a psychophysical phenomenon. And so just kind of taking into account the physicality of these light waves bouncing and being receptive to these cells doesn't really account for it, especially knowing that the image that's actually formed takes place at the back of my brain in the occipital lobe. And so there seems to be this process. First of all, there seems to be this computational process of going from signal to output. But that output, the fact that output happens so far away from like where the signal is detected, it shows that like a lot of computing power is going into generating what it is that I experience. And again, I'm not gonna claim that I know how to solve this problem of how we get from matter to consciousness, but it's clear that in our brains, and this is one of the factual things that I can state with certainty, is that there is a computational process happening in our brains. There is a process of taking inputs and doing some sort of operations on them. Perhaps with just yeses and nos. And then somehow at the very end of that train, it results in experience. And I guess experience is itself a kind of output, but it's also a kind of input, because you take that experience and then you operate upon it as well. So it's a very complicated computer. It's like one of those, I believe there's a word for it, computers that are like constantly running and constantly just taking in new inputs and then using that. Constantly generating new outputs and then using those outputs as new inputs. Do you have any thoughts on where it can go?
That was awesome. Yeah, no, that was really well done too. So I got a ton of thoughts that come to mind. So one thing I thought was pretty interesting. You know what a transducer is? It's a general term. A transducer is basically a sensor. Well, not even. Well, a device that turns some type of physical input into an electrical impulse. And so you can kind of think of the human eyes as a transducer, but you can almost think of the whole brain as a transducer. Like I almost think of it as like a light filter, like a light transducer. Like you take in a bunch of, think of it just in human terms, pixels come in, photons come in your eye, and then they get filtered down, like you're saying, like they get calculated, computed on. And like I think that what's really interesting about it is that the whole qualia thing, like the whole conscious experience, is kind of just like, and it's just an effect of what's happening. That's what's so interesting about it. It's clearly not like the goal or the aim of of evolution. You know what I mean? To create qualia, the aim and goal of evolution is to just survive and pass genes. In some sense, and just but this is a really trippy thought, and just topic in general. But something actually, we've had a few different related conversations on the Discord about this. One thing that you that recently posted was and I think this is pretty valid, is like you're saying, like this recursive aspect of it, or just continuously running on raw sense data, and that I don't know, we're kind of making up terms at this point, but there's some circular aspect that they think is related to why qualia erupts, like why consciousness exists, and we're kind of butchering terms, and we've even tried to parse out exactly what we mean when we say consciousness or qualia, or because there's specific distinctions. I was trying to use consciousness one day as just meaning a qualitative experience, and then you were saying no, it means more like attending to or being aware of something that's occurring. And both things are true, but it just depends on the context and how you choose to define it at the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, these things are super, super interesting. And I, as far as when we're going to get to the point when a computer has qualia, I mean, this is what I'm trying to explain. I don't think it's a binary, whereas I think that, there might be something to the richness of and continuity of our experience because of this recursive feedback loop thing going on that they're starting to identify in the brain circuitry, basically. Even without that, I think that what you're saying is interesting, in that, all right, fundamentally speaking, the how much different is an eyeball from a camera lens? Well, not a lens specifically, but an entire camera, it fundamentally speaking is just a transducer, like I was saying, right? So you have a lens with a bunch of photoreceptors, which are basically the rods and cones on your retina. And then that gets translated into an electrical impulse, and, how much different and at what point is that actually going to create an experience? And I think that what I'm trying to say, and what I've been trying to explain in the Discord server, is that it's a great, just like everything in life, it's a gradient. It's a spectrum. I mean, we're already at the point. I think I've talked to you about the China brain concept.
Yeah.
Have you ever? Yeah. So I mean, that's super related as well. Mm-hmm. Would that be conscious? I think it's almost super conscious, because it would be created out of so many different qualitative experiences. Very rich, deep conscious experiences. It's people talk about feeling the vibe in a room, and it's how much of that is just placebo and just weirdness and social neurology, if you want to think of it that way. It's it's that, but it also creates that feeling, it's
yeah.
So it's
no, I definitely agree with you there. I think just that ability to feel the room, or to feel other people's emotions, is a kind of collective mind, where it shows that, I mean, even though it's pretty, I think, common sense to think of the boundaries of your experience as being contained within your body. I think there are clearly experiences where it shows that our own individual psyches are not the limits of where mind can extend to. And things like crowd minds, for example, or conformity. I don't know if you've ever seen that Vsauce experiment where there's a bunch of people sitting in a waiting room, and all but one are actors, and every 20 seconds or so, the 9 actors would just stand up and then sit back down. And then eventually the person who wasn't an actor started doing it as well. So,
yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, I guess the takeaway there is that, I mean, humans themselves can kind of organize themselves into almost these computational units. And since each of them has an individual experience, you could argue that the experience of the whole system is of this mega brain.
Even though it doesn't resemble in any way that at least we can wrap our heads around an animal, an animal system with a brain and a body and
Mm-hmm.
everything else. Like it doesn't have the lens and the retina or the photoreceptors or any of that, except but it has them like spread out. It like between each person, and so it's really hard to comprehend that. How could that thing, like, how could the room have an experience? But I think it really is valid, and I can't, and just like in the same way that we can't like verify that your red is my red, like we also can't like imagine what that quality would be like. You know what I mean? It might be incredibly rich. It might be like so much more rich than what we experience. But it's like Mary in the room, like she can't know.
I wanted to talk a bit more about AI art. I mean, the craziness that's just taken off, and how I understand this and how I understood it from the video is that we've been. I mean, I guess this is kind of an analogous way of speaking rather than what's literally happening. But essentially, we've been showing the AI various examples of art, and then we put labels on that art. We tell it that these are the words that we associate with this art, and then we show it another example, maybe something completely different, a completely different art style. And then we say these are the kind of words we associate with this art, and that includes the objects in the art. So, for example, if it's a picture of a shoe or something, the word shoe will be included, and then slowly, and then through I guess training for hours and hours and millions of examples, the AI starts to recognize what a shoe is. But I mean, there's a couple of things there. First of all, does it actually recognize anything? Does it experience that recognition? I mean, I guess we tried to answer that just now, but I wouldn't know exactly how to answer that. But I think the more interesting thing is how powerful these systems have become, but also like some of the weird limitations related to it. For example, like I remember like in our server I tried to generate a face or like a person with the face, and it just did such a bad job at trying to put the face together. And the explanation that you gave me was that like the computer, it doesn't understand human faces the way we do. And it's true that our minds are very attuned to the concept of human faces. And it's almost like it's almost like archetypal that our brains are just predisposed to like distinctly know that like two dots and a line under it, a curved line under it, is a smiley face. We just know that by instinct. But this computer doesn't understand that to the same level that we do. So that's why we get all these distorted faces whenever we try to ask it to draw a person. And I thought that was just so mind numbing because it's trying so hard to replicate how humans think, but it can't do it because it's just missing that kind of fundamental structure, that fundamental evolutionary structure that we have. And it was really eye opening to see that, and it kind of creeped me out, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll take a couple liberties to try to analogize this and make it a little easier to understand. It might not be an exact representation, but you have to understand the AI, like these AIs are trained on completely different data sets than you or I as humans are. So like, and it's not so much recognition, but association, right? So like, when you're trying to generate the art, okay, you can think of it more of like, all right, it's going to take a million pictures of a shoe, layer them over top of each other, and then try to like basically trace like one specific picture between all of the different lines and points, like, kind of looking at all the pictures at once. And that like that's just a way of like thinking about how it's generating it. So but like what's important to understand is that it has no concept of human face. Okay, it just has a bunch of associations, and by layering and kind of randomly choosing combinations, like that's even how it works in Midjourney. It'll give you four generations of whatever prompt you give it, or based on what settings you choose. But it gives you options, and it generates this concept of random is a little bit tricky in computer science, especially and that's an interesting thing you should look into. But
How do you get a computer to generate random numbers, for example?
yeah, well, exactly. I mean, how we do it is using time, because time is constantly changing. It's pretty much the only thing that constantly changes. But the thing is depending on the environment, even that can be predictable at times because of the way that computers work and just the way that the program would be set up. Where was I going to go here? Yeah, so like it only has associations. It doesn't recognize, right? It doesn't have a concept of human face. So like
Mm-hmm.
we as babies, we're constantly given a continuous stream of most basic data. Okay, so red, blue, green, like shapes, and it's all the same, and it's generally the same human to human in that we're all earthlings and we all walk around and have similar bodies and whatever. But this AI, all it has is a bunch of associations with shoe or face, and so
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't like have any underlying structure or like base layer, if you want to think of it in like the tracing example of like, oh, here's a face, it always has two eyes and a mouth and a nose. It's that, you know it could layer all those pictures on top of each other and then trace one eye into another eye that happened to be there, kind of, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying my best.
Yeah, no, it's very hard to like come up with the proper metaphors, but no, I think you're explaining it well.
Yeah, I might have to occasionally take a couple seconds to. I need to become more like comfortable with like taking a few seconds to collect my thoughts. you know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I feel like urgency, and like not having any dead air. But I've recently turned down to Daniel Schmachtenberger. I hope that you like him. He does that too. He tries to slow down and collect his thoughts, take a second, and
Yeah, I need to do that as well.
yeah, we probably could both benefit from it. It's hard,
Yeah,
especially
I
when you're
wanted to
really
ask
excited
you.
about,
Yeah,
about talking about something.
yeah, especially when like the topic is so like generative and it like can go in like a million different directions.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to ask you, I mean, because the kind of model that you're describing is actually how, I mean, like, there was this weird phase in psychology called behaviorism, and it gets a lot of shit these days, but I think it's pretty interesting. I'm not like, I'm not somebody who like will like be like, this school of psychology sucks and this one's interesting.
Yeah.
The more I learn about psychology, the more I'm like, no, they all kind of have a point, and they're all like trying to explain the same thing, just using different words. But behaviorism didn't take into account subjective experience, because it argued that if I can't see somebody else's subjective experience, what's the point of even talking about it? So I'm going to base all my observations on your behavior. But then you have to ask questions like, how does cognition work, and like how does object recognition work? And the models they produced were basically just this computational model. It's like, I have concept of shoe in brain somewhere in my data storage files. I gain that concept. I see a shoe in the real world. The data comes through my eyes and it connects me to the concept. Like, it's fairly simple like that. And so even human behavior was imagined to be this fairly simple computational process of retrieving data stored in data banks. And the kind of technology that we're talking about obviously goes. I mean, I don't even know how to compare it to a human brain. Is it more? Does it have more data stored up than a human brain can? And that's one of the. I mean, this is another tangent, and I'm sorry that I keep going on like different tangents, but like a good question is like, what actually is the storage capacity of the human brain? Because like, it's not clear what's even being stored. Like, if I close my eyes and imagine an apple, like, did I retrieve that from storage, or did I generate that spontaneously? And if I generated it spontaneously, like, where did I get the storage, or like, where did I get the data to generate that image? And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of like confusion about how the brain itself works. I mean, I guess, even though we're talking about black boxes and the fact that computers kind of, they're so complicated that they've reached this level of being almost incomprehensible. I think the kind of benefit of a computer is that if you tried hard enough, you could actually get at its underlying structure. Whereas with the brain, we haven't. I mean, we're making leaps and bounds in understanding the structure of the brain, but we always keep using that kind of computational model. That like, this is basically just doing math, and the neurons in my brain are doing math. And I mean, one of the things interesting that you mentioned before was this kind of yes-no principle of neurons. Like, either it fires or it doesn't. And I guess that's related to information in general, because like information in general can be just reduced to ones and zeros, yeses and nos. And I guess the kind of idea that I have is that maybe by going beyond yeses and nos and producing more like analog computers, which are more continuous, maybe that will be the kind of thing that maybe the brain itself requires a degree of imprecision. maybe like the preciseness of just yeses and nos isn't generative enough for our structure, like our brains to do what they do. Now, with the neural networks in general, are these discrete systems or are they continuous systems?
They can be both. So this is actually a pretty good segue. So into the history. So at CMU, actually, right here in Pittsburgh, is where we started doing some of the first autonomous driving. So they outfitted all different types of cars with different self-driving sensors. So basically, the car is trying to go down the road, and they equipped it with all different types of stuff. So like lidar, all different types of proximity cameras. And then they feed that into, it depended. I would need to do a little bit more research to find out like when exactly they started doing like neural networks to actually like drive the car. Because the thing is you can automate a car to drive autonomously without an AI neural network. You know what I mean? Like it's just a totally and that's actually a good point. Like it's just a totally different way of doing it. And because of that, like, you would be less inclined to believe that it had any type of conscious experience, like even anything close to it. But like in that scenario, even in a situation where, all right, just for example's sake, imagine that even though that these two examples, like these two different ways of building a machine to accomplish the task, are very different, and you would be then inclined to believe that one would have a very different, if at all, like conscious or qualitative experience than another being generated based on like how it functions. Oh boy. That like it can still be continuous. Okay, so like because the sense data is coming in continuously, like there's no like starts and stops. And I mean, what's weird is that you can kind of think of like the frequency of the computer or the frequency of your brain and like how fast it can actually propagate signals as being the frequency or speed of it. But like, that will feed into its continuity. And what's really like kind of weird to think about is that even if it was only starts and stops, would it still be continuous in some sense? Like if you go into a coma, like where does that time go? Like in some sense it like that experience is still continuous. Like once like next one thing you're knocked out, and then the next thing it could be 20 years later and you wake up in a bed. You know what I mean? But like where did that time go? Like was that continuous experience? It might just be kind of in relation. So wow, that's kind of a weird thought. But
that's a really good example though.
but you know what I mean? Like yeah, so like these things can be continuous, so maybe it's just like in how they would relate to us, like from our reference point, does it seem like it would be having an experience that's relevant? That's a scary thought, you know what I mean? Because like it would be like from a perspective like that of like watching the human race run like an anthill or something like that, and like fast forward, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's pretty trippy.
Yeah, it is trippy. All of this is really trippy. I'm going to lose my train of thought a bunch of times. This is really tricky stuff to think about. Especially with like some of the more recent stuff that I've been thinking about. And like what's super interesting is just and we're kind of like circling around this, is just what is the thing looking at? What is the machine, like whether it's a person and like it creates a behavior, or it's this machine or this algorithm that then creates an output. It's like what is it actually looking at, and then how do we then influence that data that it takes in? It's like because we have an influence, that like these recursive like self-reinforcing machine like systems that we create, and like everything is like that, and that's what's so creepy. Like once you start to think about a problem in a specific way, it's actually really effortful to try to break yourself of that algorithmic way of calculating it. And I think that's what's just like so like off-putting and maybe concerning about, and like really limbically hijacking about like seeing like the creative AI is just not knowing how, or like not being able to understand. And then just in the same way that like you might not be able to understand like why a country would do what it did, or like why a person, whatever. Like, it's just these black box scenarios where it's like, how rich is what's happening. Like, how rich is the experience of the thing, of the agent, like, executing this, and then, like, how are we then influencing that experience? And, like, I mean, I'm like conflating a bunch of terms here, but, like, the human, I was trying to explain that, humans have continuous raw sense data, if you want to think of it that way, whereas these AIs have choreographed or controlled sense data, like, in every sense, like, spatially, temporally, everything. And then because of that, like, we control the output, but in ways that we can't know. You know what I mean? Like, at least not directly. Like, we change the pool of inputs going into these things, and then it inevitably creates, an output that sometimes is advantageous and ideal, but, like, it's just this weird recursivity of it, like, where like, us choosing that it's good, like, reinforces that it's good, and then like, that influences then the calculation in the future. It's mind blowing. I'm curious. Like, we have a bunch of other things to talk about, but just this is getting to a point where I've heard different estimations. I mean, I'm not like an authority to say, but like, in the next 5 years, like, it's really hard to know where this is going to go. The qualia thing is interesting, but then the sociological implications. It's like, just to like quickly talk about, like, the Black Mirror episode that's pretty related to this, I think, and we've already talked about it when they put the mind slave clone inside of the house automation system, and it's like,
inside the toaster.
Yeah. And so we're talking about the ethics of this, and the qualia and all of that, and like, I think the unfortunate and scary thing about it is that's going to be an afterthought. You know what I mean? To
Right.
like, to monetization, and it already has been. So like, there's all these ethical implications. It's like, meanwhile, what we kind of are forced to pay more attention to is something like what I put at the end of our little document here is, like, these deep fakes. So like, it like, political and just misinformation in general is a major problem, that is kind of sowing the seeds of our societal demise, if you ask me right now. And we're trying
definitely.
to deal with figure out ways to deal with it. But, like, and granted, it's not perfect. We'll put up a picture, in the video. But I just put into a prompt really quickly: Trump has dinner with Putin at the White House. Right. So, like, and then I had it generate, 16 different versions. And it's really weird. I mean, if you look at it, it's like Trump's face is an American flag in half of them. But it's like, you can take this base image, and then if you had any Photoshop knowledge, you could easily manipulate it and pretty it up. Okay. And the thing is in the next 5 years, because of, like, the cumulative and, like, snowball, layer, like, because neural networks get more and more, like, what gives them complexity and power is their layering. Okay, like, all that we're doing is layering and layering and layering, and like, that's how tech in general works. But now these AI systems are just going to get even more that way, because the data set just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and because it's, like, becoming monetizable, like, in a specific way, more and more computing power is going to be thrown at it. So basically, the raw computing power is bigger, but then also the data set is bigger, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, like, it's going to get to the point where, like, any Joe Schmo can go to one of these things and type in Trump has dinner with Putin at the White House, and it could even produce a video, like, in theory. And like, even beyond that, like, I don't know, we should definitely put this in the video too. There's this hilarious video of this Chinese guy who gets out of a Tesla and has a deep fake Elon Musk filter on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elon Musk.
Doesn't have to say anything, but, like, they could dub Elon Musk's voice over whatever they want, and now they even have AI generated voices, and so it's just, and that's actually pretty robust already. AI generated,
Really?
AI generated voices. Yeah, it was crazy on the H3 podcast. They were, I think they stopped doing it, which is probably smart, but they were having AI generated Jordan Peterson quotes. and they were like indistinguishable, and it's just like that's scary, you know. I mean, like
That's incredible.
well,
I
yeah,
mean, it's, yeah, horrifying and incredible.
yeah, and we're there now for audio, and I mean, you combine that with like video, which is definitely coming, like I'm saying, you know, or even just someone with a little bit of like you know, production skill, and like, you know, anything can be real now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so straightforward to just keep building upon it because all you need to do is just add more layers, and then you can definitely get to the level of producing full quality videos. And yeah, does it? I mean, does this ruin society? Is society you're just like permanently spoiled by the fact that like now I can just I can generate an image of whatever I want of a person doing whatever I want them to be doing. I can even use their voice to make them say things that they never actually said. It almost like I mean I don't know what to think about it because I've always been optimistic that like whatever this universe is has some kind of purpose. But you see something like this and you think, well, is it spoiled now? Like, is society just ruined? And is this what happens to every society? They just reach a point where like they become incapable of distinguishing reality from pixels on a screen.
Yeah, have you heard of the Great Filter?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what you're describing, at least one version of it. Yeah, I do worry about it, man. I like, here's the thing, like, a rising tide raises all boats, okay? But at the same time, like, it only takes one hole in the bottom of a boat to sink it, right? So, like, and as our society gets more and more interconnected, and we like, it only takes a few bad actors, or you know, it's a lot easier to burn something down than it is to build it up, okay? It's like, it's easy to type into Midjourney, you know, Trump has dinner with Putin at the White House, and then post it, and then even if it only, you know, convinces a tiny fraction of people, that signal then gets amplified over time, right? So like, and that's, oh man, it's problematic, you know. I mean, and that's kind of what, like, it's all kind of a similar problem. So like, in the same way that, you know, something like the prompt term Baroque, I think was what we were using as an example in when we were talking about it earlier. Like, Baroque is a specific term when you're trying to do AI art generation that produces good results. But like, because of that, people are overusing it, and then it's just gonna taint the epistemic commons or just the data set, you know, whatever you want to think of it. But like, all these things are kind of the same, you know. It's like what we take in as being the inputs of reality is like, you know, what is the nature of the economy? We're constantly debating it, you know. So like, but that's still an input, you know, into like how we consider it and like and how we view it, and like, but all of that is open to interpretation and hype, you know, and like, so like there's hype around Baroque as an AI art generation term, and then there's just in the same way that there's hype generated around like terms like trickle down economics or this or that, or, you know, we always have to come up with some rhyme, you know, like some catchy little alliteration or like something to like hijack your brain and really stick it in there, and like it's how much is that everything, and like, and where is this going to go if it's so easily manipulatable like that, and like, and we just keep getting more and more interconnected, and it's getting harder and harder to tell truth from fiction. Yeah.
I mean, I want to throw something in there. I mean, this might be another tangent, but I think you'll be interested. Is that I'm getting really concerned that people are starting to think that they're starting to experience reality through the internet, through the filter of the internet, and the reason this is so concerning is because anything can be on the internet. You know, like I can make any claim and then find somebody making the same claim and then just be like, well, see, my claim is confirmed. So it not only distorts truth,
and then that gets validity, and then that gets considered into the data set. You know, and,
yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like, just because it's there, even if there's like nothing behind it. Like in my video, I'm trying to. I wish I could have finished it before we had this conversation, but like, you know, something you brought up, and I that I do want to like explicate a little bit better. Like the parallel I'm trying to draw with like finding out if she's a witch and like, you know, saying that she's made of wood or whatever is like like that was the science of the day. Like that was the accepted data set. Like that was the accepted pattern, and because of that, it was objective and true. You know, and like that's so many things even today now. Like we always have this matrixed knowledge or like just perception that like, you know, oh, science is objective, you know, but like, yeah, you know, witch hunts were scientific, you know, back in the day, you know what I mean? And it's just, and nowadays, because, man, it's just, you have to dig so deep to find out if something that's presented scientifically actually is. There are just so many things that are presented as scientific nowadays, because that's how you actually convince people. You know, like science has done so much for us in terms of standard of living and whatever, that it's the new religion. You know, it's like, but the problem is that, like, in the same way that a preacher, you know, can stand up at the front of the church and say a bunch of things that are his interpretation of what the original data was, you know, it's like the same exact thing happens with engineering. You know, it's like a great example, and that really ticks me off, is the Cybertruck poll. You know, like if you look into the physics of that, it has all to do with grip and traction, and really all that it proves is that the Cybertruck is heavy. That's primarily what that proves. It doesn't prove that you know, the trucks would need to be the same weight and have the same tires in order to actually make it a fair test. But like, everyone sees the Cybertruck pull the Ford F-150 and they're like, oh my god, and that's science, you know, like that in their mind, and that's objective, and that validates their reasoning and becomes reality, you know. Have you seen that? Have you ever seen that?
I haven't.
Oh man, you got to see it. I mean, all it is, like, it's the Cybertruck. It's from years ago. The Cybertruck is hooked up to like, they're both pulling away from each other to an F-150. But like, and you know, this shit fools engineers, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's what's concerning about it to me. Like I mean, sure, it feels really good to say, woo, Cybertruck, you know, and it's like, that thing is shiny. It looks like a DeLorean, but it's like, but like, you're selling me bullshit. Like you're telling me a lie, and like, even if it's a good product, like you're misrepresenting what's going on, you know, and it's just this shit is only going to keep happening. It only takes one bad apple or one bad actor to ruin something like at the epistemic commons, which it's a really important thing to understand. It's just you know, Schmachtenberger throws the term around a lot, and we've talked about it. We talked about it a lot in the first conversation that we had. It's just the idea that the pool of knowledge, whatever that means, is a thing that can be changed and manipulated and ruined, really. You know, it can be bolstered or ruined, but it's a lot easier to ruin it. It's like a house of cards. It's a lot easier to break than it is to build. And
well, because true statements are so rare, but like, you can just any bullshit statement you can just make, and they're just infinitely generative.
Even if it has one, and all it needs is a little bit of truth. Sometimes it has no truth, but it sounds true. You know, or
right.
Someone wants it to be true.
Like, the logic seems to work out.
Yeah, from the data set that you're applying to it, right? You know, I mean, that, you know, lying by omission, trickle truthing. You know, people trickle truth themselves. They don't. They only want to see what validates their perspective. You know, and I mean, that's just all of human history. You know, the concept of might makes right, and just man, I've been thinking a ton about all these concepts, and you know, I really want to get my hyperstition video done, but it's really tricky. I wanted to introduce something that I think is helpful. You know, if you think about it, I think I've used the word negative hype before, but like, what's even better than that, and I think is pretty clever, is thinking of it as gripe. You know, because like that's the counteracting force. You know, it's like mudslinging versus you know, bolstering, whatever terminology you want to use. But it's like it's just like how, you know, all right, Hillary Clinton has a rally, and then Trump has a rally, and then they're both mudslinging at each other, and they're both simultaneously trying to hype and gripe at the other person, and but it's like what are we hyping right now? You know, like right now we're hyping. I don't know. I mean, one thing that I think that we should touch on, and I mean, like, we're both fully aware of it, and we already talked about it in the first conversation, but, you know, just in the history of this, the way that I've come to describe it is, we aimed a novel, opaque, powerful technology at our weakest point. right? So we like the way that we've used AI up until this point has only been really in like really mostly for advertising, but also for social media post. What would you say? Promotion, okay, but that in and of itself is a form of advertising because you know it's kind of like Facebook advertising for itself because they're just trying to keep you on their site, you know. But yeah, so like we basically were like, all right, what do people? And this will actually be a good transition. Like, what are people engaged with? Okay, and like because that's all that they care about. You know, it's like for a social media site anyway. You know, it's as long as you're on the site, then you're still looking at the advertisements. Okay, and so there's an interesting phenomena, whatever you want to call it. It's called Poe's law. And it's basically the idea that like you can't determine sarcasm online. Okay, so like you, but it's tied, I think, also to the idea that just because you're engaged or looking at something or like attending to it doesn't mean that you're promoting or hyped on it, if you want to think of it that way. So it's like, and that's the problem with applying these AI algorithms in the way that we have to social media and to advertising, because, well, especially social media, because and like just social media interaction. Advertising is related, but not exactly what I'm talking about. It's just that, like, in the same way that you can't not look at a car crash when you drive past it, it doesn't mean that you wanted it to happen or that you're like happy about it, but you're still engaged with it. And it's the same thing with social media. We've heard it a zillion times now, but just that outrage sells, or that outrage propagates. People like to be pissed off, and they like to, and it's just, and you can clearly see it on Facebook. It's like people love to argue in the comments, and then Facebook loves to promote it. Get in on the dog pile, and it's just in the same way, it's like, all right, I'm going to use the Baroque prompt to create this art. It's like, I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm manipulating and possibly damaging the epistemic commons in some sense of the data set of art, and feeding into this hyped up thing, and everything has its own gradient of goodness and badness in terms of human suffering or whatever. It's like, like the whole Baroque thing isn't very significant, but like when you're reposting some outrageous shit about, whatever you want, factory farming or the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, whatever it is, it's all kind of the same. If you're not really, you're only thinking about the outrage, you're not thinking about how what you're sharing or what you're saying is going to damage someone or further entrench them in their position. It's super tricky. I think that we really need to take a step back and realize like what's happening here and just understand like what's worth it, like to be able to be able to get like personalized ads, and honestly, like we've even had this conversation too. Like I would even attribute some of my success recently to these personalized ads, as stupid as that sounds, because like, I'll be working on something and I'm like, I can't seem to figure out this problem. I have this thing I'm trying to build and like I can't even wrap my head around or like start to think about what would be a solution, and then all of a sudden like a personalized ad will come up and like put me down a trail to figure it out, and so
it's just crazy that they know.
or the YouTube algorithm, I mean, the number of awesome videos that I found via just search. Now I've been using the homepage more, which people are upset about, or like, oh well, people are moving away from the subscription of YouTube and everything's trying to copy TikTok, and it's like, well, everything, it has two sides to it. It's like, I've learned a ton, like by going through just recommended videos on YouTube. Like a perfect example. I was on, I'm pretty sure that I didn't like just spontaneously search this, but even if I did, like it very well just could have been just a suggestion. This video, you gotta watch it. It's called, it's not even a video. It's a goddamn, I don't know. It's a 7-part documentary. It's huge. It's not.
Oh, okay.
It's enormous. It's 7 hours long, and it's about metallurgy. It's just the history of metallurgy, and yeah, you would love it. It was so interesting, and it's great because it's a great bedrock position and like perspective to take on human civilization, because so much of technology is based around metallurgy and like the ability to create and manipulate metals, and like around technology is what human civilization is built. Human civilization is built around our technology. So it was just like a super interesting way to look at like the rise of human civilization, like all the way from the Stone Age, the Bronze Copper Age to the Iron Age, and just understanding how all of that happened. You got to watch it. It was super interesting.
Yeah, I definitely want to check that out. It seems that like I guess one of the fundamental takeaways is that like all of this can be used for good and can be used productively and actually can be something that benefits us. It just depends on kind of how we use it.
Yeah, we can make a plow or we can make a gun.
Yeah.
It's to use metal as an analogy, and we as humans, we always inevitably make both, and I think that really the only way through this is to talk. We got to actually talk about this stuff, and like when we see something that doesn't pass the sniff test, we got to at least start considering and talking about it, like I think that we are now. You and me right here, because this was both really. Yeah, I mean, like the conversation is both hopeful and concerned. We're talking about some cool things that are related to this, as far as like, how is this related to qualia? Like, what could this mean for humanity in general in the future? Maybe we should talk about some of those better aspects, because we've actually talked mostly about bad ones, I think. But so maybe this will be an interesting transition. In the design theory video, he talks about people having like personalized AIs, and I mean that seems similar to me to that Black Mirror episode where they put the girl in the toaster, and especially like, and again, I guess really what it comes down to, and we got to ask the question. It's like, at what point is the thing like having a qualitative experience? At what point does it matter? And like, when does it have rights? Like when we could just choose not to care at all, like they do in that Black Mirror video, and just try to rationalize and say, oh well, it doesn't have feelings or thoughts or anything, and like how many times have we gone back to that argument, about other people, about animals, about so many things,
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, I mean hard to parse out.
One of the concerns. One of the things that I think is leading to all these concerns is that maybe the technology just went too fast, and that maybe like we as a species aren't at like the moral or I don't know what you want to call it, like the spiritual level to actually be using these things without it necessarily being destructive.
What's a really interesting thought I just had? That might be a backwards way of thinking about it, unfortunately, because like we might like. Like in a weird way, like you said, that we're not living, like we're living on our phones. I don't know what exactly you said. Like we're another way to put it is that we're living in the world of maps and not geography. Like the problem is that like we might get further and further less able to actually address this problem, because we get further and further captured by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, what came to my mind when you said that is that like we made the plow. And like we had the plow for a long time, but like how did that wind up playing out? Like the way that it played out was that then, that basically allowed power to like accumulate and like in the form of surplus, and then there were kings and queens and castles and all kinds of shit, and it's like, all right, well we can say that maybe in some ways that was better than what was before that, in terms of like, oh well, there were just tribes and then they would randomly war with each other and kill each other or whatever and whatever, but like how much different is that with the kings and queens? Well, now they just have shiny armor on and pointier sticks, it's like,
it seems like a trade-off. Like you have more surplus, sure, but then you have more organized combat. Like you have war on bigger scales, or like you have dictators, and like so like it seems like every step we take forward is simultaneously a step into prosperity and despair.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess my point is just that like if we took the same mentality that you're saying that maybe we need to take, in that we're going to get better and we're going to figure out better ways to deal with this and whatever, it's like, well, did we find out better ways to deal with agriculture like as time went on, or did it kind of like was it like kind of good at first and then got worse? Like that's kind of how things unfortunately go, because like when people were first starting agriculture, they probably didn't war with each other because they were too busy figuring out how to do it, but then there was one guy who was like, fuck this, I don't want to do this anymore, and he went and stole everyone else's shit. It's just it like unfortunately like there's like a freshness where you originally build the house of cards, but then like because people want to pull out from the bottom of it, like different like trickery and like control mechanisms have to go into place to prevent people from doing that, and it's hard to explain, but like my point is basically just that maybe we need to like not think that we're going to figure out newer, fancier ways to come up with to fix things, and maybe we need to kind of like bring it back to basics and think, okay, wait a second, we can't tech our way out of this. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's going to have to be a combination, because like we're Schmachtenberger actually talks about it, the kind of like this. He's like, we can't like take the Luddite approach where we just reject all technology, and we also can't like, just technology our way out of the problem entirely. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So,
Actually, yeah. So we gotta wrap this up because I gotta go soon. But I think overall the points that we can take away, is just that society's moving, and it's moving in a lot of directions, and it's kind of like in a lot of ways like moving blindly. And I think it's important for us to like talk and like actually, stop being so blind to the way things are moving and actually see the process happening, so that we have some ability to exert control over it.
Yeah. I use this I won't hold you up, but we'll go for like another 5 minutes. But I use this idea. I brought it up a bunch of times, like the idea of an excavator. Okay, like or even just having a shovel. You're a human. You have a shovel. Like when you scoop that earth, it's like, think of all the microorganisms and all the complex interactions and like that are happening in that dirt, biologically speaking. You're not aware of any of it. Like all you're aware of is it's dirt, it's brown. And like it just, so much of that is how technology works. Just even in the sense of the plow, it's like, what was the plow? Oh, well, it helped us move dirt a little better. Yeah, but look at what it did. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like and like the repercussions of that we couldn't foresee. In the terms of like, in the same way we can't know all the things that are happening in that shovel full of dirt. Like we can't know what the repercussions of creating the plow are. And like and beyond that, it's even harder to tell when you're a part of it, and like it's been years and years and this hyped up reinforcement of ways of looking at things. It's like it just becomes part of the landscape, is a way that I explain it. How many things in our lives are just part of the landscape. Think like just tools that you have to use to get through the day. It's like, you hop in your car and go to work. It's necessary. Like cars have existed for 100 years. You know what I mean? It's like that's it. It's 2 or 3 generations. But it's just how people get killed in cars all the time. But that's just a fact of life, but is it, because we make it a fact of life. We made it one, and I mean, like, just what are the facts of life that we're going to allow to be made now, and granted, there's, how much control do we really have? It's like, that's a whole other question. Like this thing is just a giant organic monster. It feels like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the experience of the human race? Like, what is that? What's that quality like? I don't know. Yeah. It's just like, wow.
I mean, what is the experience of a race that's also keen on destroying other members of its race? It's like this very self-destructive. I mean, yeah,
it's dark. It's really dark. And like the pulling of the card out from the bottom of the stack. We it's real. Humans have this uncanny ability to compartmentalize and forget nasty shit. Like, yeah, we can get traumatized, but it's like, we have our hot coffee in the morning and a good game of poker, once a week, and like we can, if we're healthy, we could focus on that and think of that as being, worthwhile. But like, dude, so much horrible stuff happens, man. Like and just the not even horrible stuff that happens, but people who consciously choose to profit off of it. Like a good example, and I've just been questioning, my own perspective on it. Like, I watched the Dahmer movie, the Dahmer series, and like it's super fascinating, and like I didn't know a whole lot about like his life, and like the more I learned about how every 3 years there's some kind of money grab like thing that comes out, like where they're trying to profit off of this tragedy. But like then again, it's a mixed bag. It's like at the same time, I think that there was a lot of value to like trying to understand like his psychology and like where things went wrong, and like what could be done to prevent things like this, and also just the strife and pain that the victims went through. But it's just like, then you also have to think that Netflix or Hulu or whatever it is like making profit off of this, and it's like it's just like, it's tough, man.
Yeah, it's a weird thing that I don't think a lot of people recognize, is that this two-sided nature of almost everything. I mean, we like things to be very clear cut, but I mean, our psychology seems predisposed to think of the world as clear cut, but in reality, it's always these double-sided. Depends on kind of how you use it, and everything kind of has a positive and negative side.
Yeah, you can use a wrecking ball a crane to wreck a building or to build it. This has been a kind of like, I think we focused more on like some of the positive aspects last conversation that we had. I think this was a good one though. I think we touched on some interesting things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to be a little bit positive, I mean, like the AI, I did put at the bottom here. I mean, we didn't even talk about some of the beautiful art that it generated. Like like you hooked it up to our Discord server, and we generated some stuff, and so maybe we'll put those pictures in the video. But it's awesome. And then beyond that, it could really liberate people's time, a lot. And then like further down as an example, I made like this super simple like fleur-de-lis geometry, in Fusion 360, and then put a gradient on it in Photoshop. And then I ran it through Night Cafe with a couple prompts, and it made this awesome like oil painting like version of it, and like, I'm not capable of doing something like that personally, but I was using this technology. I was able to generate something, that looks like I did, and like, and it's just, we talked in the last conversation about different possibilities, but it's like things like this could generate entire 3D environments, and then it's going to change the way that creatives work, and that creative work is done in general, especially in like digitally speaking, whether it's digital art in the form of video games or just media, but. It's super empowering, and like you're saying, it's empowering just in the same way that anything's empowering. It can empower you to destroy or empower you to build. So we just got to be really careful and keep an active conversation going, I think.